Hello there, my lovelies. Welcome to another episode of Listening to the Voices in Our Heads, where we visit with creative minds and their creative processes. I am Jenna O'Malley, your soul writer, and we're visiting today with John Champaign. Our discussion delves into a variety of voices, including his time as a computer science professor, writing nonfiction niche books, and of course, discussing our shared love of tabletop role-playing games. Before we begin, please show the like button some love, double check the subscribe and bell buttons, and don't hesitate to leave a comment. And of course, take care of you more each day. I know you're worth it. Now, let's rock it. Welcome back, my lovelies. Again, I'm Jenna O'Malley, your soul writer, and we are in another episode of Listening to the Voices in Our Heads with a dear friend of ours, John. Would you like to take a moment and introduce yourself, my friend?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of personally, I'm an early retiree. I used to be a computer science professor, and before that, I was a software developer. And sort of as my retirement project, I've been getting into writing a lot more intently. Back kind of as a side gig, I used to be a blogger, and I wrote for a moderately popular Canadian personal finance blog. And then about a year ago, I released what I kind of consider my debut novel, an urban fantasy novella called Merchant Magician. Ironically, it came out the exact day that your book came out, Valentine's Day last year. So we both decided that'd be a good day to release on.
Happy
I think
1 year!
Yeah. I think yours was a lot more romantic than mine, so it was probably a better day for you than me.
Not really, but every warrior deserves a cuddle, whether or not they won the battle, to be fair. So yes,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Since then, I've more recently released a nonfiction called Getting Started as a Small Scale Landlord. And the idea behind it is to treat being a landlord like a part-time job you can give yourself rather than a get rich quick scheme. And so it's all like kind of war stories, kind of from the trenches, and kind of instructions of best practices kind of for being a landlord.
So it's very analogous versus data-driven.
Right, sure. And then I'm putting the final touches right now on a kind of a book slash game that the working title right now is Our First Role-Playing Game. And it basically creates like a framework to take a group of people from 2 to 5 people through role-playing for the very first time, where none of the people in the group have ever role-played in any way. And it's literally zero preparation. So you open the book and it teaches you how to play as you play a little session.
So it has that board game mindset where you, oh my goodness.
Yeah, but then even less preparation than a board game, because normally with a board game, someone has to read the rules before you play. And this is literally, it could be in shrink wrap and you open it and you're playing seconds later. And so that's kind of, in one play test, somebody said, well, could you get somebody to pre-read this? And I said, one of the design objectives is that it's zero prep. And so I'm play testing that right now. And then I've just submitted to a small press a kind of a full length, a 72,000 word fantasy novel, and it's a nautical high fantasy action adventure novel. And so either we'll see what happens with the small press, and failing that, I might release it kind of as a serial or independently publish it or something.
Congratulations. Yeah. Oh my goodness. As somebody who loves the D20 system, oh my goodness, that's a feat because, yeah, character rolling. That's pain.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't like math. That's pain.
Sure,
Oh my
goodness. Sure. It's not intended to take the place of D&D or any of the existing systems. It's more for the person who I've seen Stranger Things and I'm interested in what they're doing. I want to try that, but I'm really intimidated because I don't understand when I watch Critical Role. I don't understand everything that's happening, and I don't want to be doing all the background reading, and I don't want to, do everything to learn how to do it. And so, unfortunately, somebody who's interested enough that they've done it already a little bit like yourself would probably find it. You'd sort of be like, okay, I already get all of this. But for somebody who they're interested, but they're really intimidated by the existing systems, that's kind of right in the wheelhouse. That's who I'm going to try to target.
And as someone who loves sharing that culture of storytelling, because I view it as not just a game, it's literally a method of storytelling. I'm glad there is an easy entryway for new people, because I've had friends who have looked at it and said, no way. There's how many manuals?
Yes.
There's how many math problems involved just for me to come to the first session? No way.
Yes.
It really, unfortunately, puts a divider in who you can do what with in your friend group. So thank you.
Yeah. And so that's exactly, I guess, somebody like yourself who's already familiar with tabletop role-playing games, that would be the one time the product might be appealing. If you could say to somebody, there's no preparation, there's no math, there's no rule books. We'll sit down and do this, and we'll all start with a blank slate and learn it together. One of my friends, he was playing Dungeons and Dragons, and his wife decided to try it with them, and her character was introduced in like prison or something like that, and him and the other characters decided not to release her. So they played the game, and she was like frozen in ice the whole time or something like that. And it's kind of funny, but obviously she had a terrible experience, and she was like, I'm done with this role playing. And so, it avoids problems like that, right? It's structured so that you kind of go through and you get a taste of what it would be like, rather than being stuck in an iced prison for 3 hours or whatever.
And also, I imagine by comparison, the price point entry is probably a lot more newbie friendly compared to, because I know just, a monster based compendium from any of those D20 systems can be $20 just by itself.
Yeah. So to start off with, it's going to be totally free. So it'll just be print and play, and you get it. Yeah, you get the, there's basically 5 documents, and one's for the game master, and then one is for each of the players from 1 to 4 players. And all you need beyond that is paper and some 6-sided dice, and you can play just with that. And I just recently was talking to a man who's really into nonfiction books and whatnot, and he had an excellent suggestion that game shops would be a good target market. And so somebody goes into their friendly local game store and they say, I'm interested in role playing, but I don't understand anything about it. And that it's something that the game store owner could pull out and say, give this a try. If you like it, then we can talk in more detail about the different systems, but this is something you can very accessible and try it for free. And so that's kind of an angle I'm taking on it. Yeah.
I could even see where, because at least where I live, comic book stores are starting to make a small comeback. Like, for the first time ever, we have more than one comic book store within a 2-hour drive of where I live.
Super.
That is actually doing well. And I could imagine where in a comic book store they could host a intro to tabletop night and use this as their low-key way, and that would be an amazing marketing outlet for you, at least to get the word out, I imagine.
Absolutely.
Because of the cultural overlap for subculture context.
Yes. And then the long-term kind of benefit for me is that, first of all, it's kind of a product that people know I've done. So if I do something down the road that I'm selling, I have a little bit of a history there. And then if it was wildly successful, there'd always be the possibility to do a Kickstarter for a print version with artwork, or potentially to collaborate with a game company and to do an introduction that was more flavored towards their system, or some follow-up like that.
Oh my goodness. I hope this pans out for you. This is amazing, not just as an author, but of a consumer of that subculture. I hope that pans out for you. So we totally already went off on a chaotic tangent, lovelies, but let's go ahead and bring it on back. This is all information that was totally worth sharing. So as far as you read, you told us a lot about what you write. Do you read what you write? And if so, if not, what's the genre?
Yeah, so I probably do read what I write, and sort of it's like genre fiction for the most part, sort of fantasy, science fiction, a little bit of horror, and then I read a ton of nonfiction. And so, you know, I read like a lot of writing advice books right now just because I'm really interested in that. But then other nonfiction I'm generally interested in.
If you need to know any good writing books, I know about
Yeah.
10 years worth of recommendations from teaching writing. So
Wow, great.
if anyone wants to know a good writing recommendation book that is not necessarily, because I don't necessarily focus on fiction perspective, because in my opinion, if you read a book about argumentation, your dialogue is going to get way better.
Right.
So if you need to
Great.
any questions about that, I have a list that is pages long in Microsoft Word to share.
Awesome.
So
Great.
love it. Is there one you would like to recommend though, as far as one of the ones you're reading right now?
The Murderbot Diaries. If
Ooh,
you,
yes.
yeah,
That's on my TBR because I have a
yes.
series coming up with a murder subplot. Oh,
Yes. So it's really wild, but they're a series of novellas for the most part. She just wrote a novel as the 5th book or something, but they're novellas. They're really focused, really interesting. The protagonist is kind of you know, a little bit kind of non-binary, maybe not neurotypical, and beyond that, just really tight, really strong writing, really interesting. Everyone I've recommended it to has really enjoyed it, so it's really good.
really good.
Yeah, yeah.
So, as far as with all these amazing things coming up and all this preparatory research writing you're doing in the meantime, what is your biggest fear and your biggest excitement in the next, say, 6 months as an author? 6 months to
Yeah,
a year.
yeah. So I think the right now the biggest fear is probably that I'm writing things and no one cares, and
I
so
know
that
that feeling.
yeah, and that maybe someone's reading it because they're a friend of mine or they're a nice person, and in their heart of hearts they're thinking this is terrible, but then they say, oh, it's so great, thanks for writing such a wonderful book, rolling their eyes kind of behind my back. The greatest excitement, I guess, is the flip side of that, that someone's reading something that's really valuable to them, that they just really enjoy, or they're reading something, if it was nonfiction, that helps them solve a problem or improves their life in some way. And so those kind of two, you know, two sides of the coin, you're kind of risking that people don't care about what you're producing, to take the chance at producing something that people find really valuable.
Correct. And on that note, welcome to Imposter Syndrome as an author. It gets better some days, is all I
Sure.
can offer. But yes, that's literally something I've been talking to about with our shared 1-year anniversary coming
Right.
around. That's definitely something that's been a topic of conversation in my household the past week or two of the imposter syndrome doesn't really go away. It just picks
No.
its days that it wants to show up.
That's absolutely it. I kind of thought what you were saying there a little bit was that imposter syndrome's at the beginning and it never goes away. And in academia, it's the exact same thing. Sort of academics are kind of working away, and no matter how much they accomplish, no matter how much they achieve, no matter where they are, the imposter syndrome's kind of lurking there in the background. And it's pretty pervasive. So it's, yeah, it's something that kind of I've been living with for a long time.
We're both, as we're going to discuss further here in a little bit, we're both educators, so we
Yes.
definitely feel that. But before we do, what are some tips you have for surviving that imposter syndrome inner self-critic?
So the inner self-critic, the kind of first way I think to survive it is possibly to view it as your friend. And what I'm saying with that is there's a really famous quote that made the rounds by Ira Glass. And he was talking about kind of achieving success and kind of getting good at things. And he said that anyone who has taste is going to be really horrified by their own early products that they produce. And so it's going to be really disheartening when they make something, and because they have that taste, they can see that what they're producing isn't very good. But what he said is that that awareness is what you need to develop and to guide you and to improve your craft, whatever you're doing, to eventually get good. And he said that taste that you're really upset with your own early works is what is going to let you consistently improve. And somebody who just the first time they produced something said, well, this seems like a masterpiece, I don't know why everybody wouldn't love this. They just lack the self-awareness and the being able to be critical of their own work to refine it. And yeah, so that's the first thing with that critic, that as awful as they are, as awful as it is, it's potentially helping you long term. Beyond that, though, it gets the best of you some days. And so, you know, I've had periods where I'm just not producing anything because I'm just so wrapped up in that and really getting down on my work, and it just freezes me up. I found that for first drafts, at least, of work, you basically have to outrun the critic. You have the inner critic. You have to outrun it. And if I'm pausing and reworking a sentence or a section and trying to get it quite right, I'm just about done for. The inner critic catches up with me and beats me into the ground. And so I have to just quickly get it out and move ahead, and then have faith that in the revisions I can come back and try to get what I really wanted out of it and really improve it and refine it at that point. But that the first draft, it's so fragile. You have to just keep producing.
I love the way you worded it. You do feel like that first draft is fragile for your first book. I'm working on book 3 in the series now. It's a mess. I don't care. Just bleed it out, kind of onto paper, and like you said, deal with it in revisions.
Yes.
And I think that's where we truly shine.
Yes.
I forget where I heard this, but it's kind of like polishing garbage a little bit.
Sure.
But even when you get a piece of furniture from, say, a thrift store and revamp it, it sometimes looks better than it did when it was brand new.
Absolutely.
So it's very similar with our writing sometimes, is what I tell my students. And you're right. Yeah. You're right. Sometimes you just got to slog through it. You just got to deal with it.
So some writers are really down on Nanowrimo, and I think it's good for that because it's a really fast pace, and it's about getting it out, writing the 50,000 words in November, not necessarily having them publishable quality or every piece being brilliant.
And if not hitting that 50K, because I did NaNoWriMo with some friends on a different series on this very channel, Nanowri Updates, actually, you know, I had life happen to me, and I had to have surgery. The weekend before NaNoWriMo, November 1st started. I only got 36K out of 50.
But it's 36K more than you did otherwise, or you would have otherwise, right?
Don't write that much in a month.
Yes.
It normally takes me 7 months from brainstorming, planning, outlining to sending it to my editor.
Yeah.
Now I've got it down to 5 because of doing NaNoWriMo. I cut off 2 full months from my process because of what you said. Just sitting down, grinding it out, and just being like, you know what? It's going to suck. It's not going to be magic the first time it comes out. That's okay.
Right. Yeah. So there's a win.
In the edit and the revisions guide.
Yes.
So as far as what's going on with your writing, as far as who is helping you deal with that inner critic outside of your own self, what are your writing communities like in person versus virtual, and which do you prefer of the two, if either?
Yeah, so I've tried online writing communities. So on Discord and on Reddit, there's self-publish on Reddit and writing on Reddit and destructive readers on Reddit.
I love destructive readers. They really, really get gritty sometimes.
Oh, really? Eh? Okay, I met one of the moderators at my one of my in-person writing groups. Yeah. And
that
so
must have been a 50-50 chance of a good memory and a cringe memory, depending on who it is, question mark?
he was really sweet. And so I think it's one of those things where I hope that the common view is to be hard on the writing, but gentle on the writer. I don't know.
Can
Yeah.
we say that again louder for the audience, please? I love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
So to be hard on the writing, but gentle on the writer. Yeah.
Love that. And if
Yeah.
I think a lot of authors or writers or people who have been reading for many, many years, different types of genres tend to feel that way.
Sure.
Then you have
Yeah.
your genre lovers who want everything to be perfect to the nth degree. And
Yeah. Yeah. And so then I did a writing group in person, which it was kind of like a weekly kind of meeting, kind of at a local pub. And it was while COVID was winding down and everybody would go out and kind of was excited to get out of the house and kind of would meet up and kind of would do that. And for me personally, and this is something that I kind of feel like anybody writing should say a lot more often, is that all writing advice is this is what works for me, give it a try, but it may or may not work for you, that there aren't very many universals. And for me, I just found that I tend to, I think almost all writers are introverts, and I'm probably even more of an introvert than a typical writer, but I just get more accomplished working on my own at home. And the social element of the groups, online communities, in-person communities is nice. But after I've spent sort of 4 hours going to a writing group, I sometimes think I might have got more accomplished if I just worked on my work in progress for 4 hours, or if I'd read one of those books that Jenna recommended on writing at home, instead of kind of what often just becomes a little bit of a social outlet, which is fine. But if you really want to work on your craft, if you want to develop your writing, you kind of have to pick what the most efficient way for you is to do that. I'm very lucky that my wife does kind of light editing and proofreading for me, and so I kind of have an in-house editor proofreader, which I'm really fortunate to have.
at least it's someone who will check the major things that a common reader will get for you. Great.
Yes. Yeah.
And as a hermit Virgo introvert myself, I'm feeling what you said.
Yeah.
I didn't become a social butterfly until I became an author, strangely enough.
Right. There you go.
And there are some days where I wonder if I invested my time wisely, because for us as authors, especially when you're viewing it as a business, time is not just money. Time is your greatest resource.
You're you're absolutely right, and I think the way that you're thinking about it is really important for people to realize. It's an investment, right? Every time you're choosing to do one activity instead of another, you're choosing to invest in that. And there's a line with consultants that writers could use as well, that as long as you're sleeping, you still have inventory.
Correct.
Right? And so,
Correct.
as you say, it's time, right? We're turning our time into these products that eventually form our business. And wherever we spend that time, it's time we can't spend somewhere else.
Right. So, like you said, you really, little title, shameless plug here, listen to the voice in your head and do what your process needs you to do.
Yes.
For sure on that regard. Know where you know your goals, and so what, your goals are different from another author. That's business.
Right. Absolutely. Yep.
Is the Golden Arches going to have the same exact business goals as the Big King? Probably not.
Right.
Close? Yes. Same? No. And that's perfect. Lovely.
Yeah, I love it.
So, as far as this next question goes, we're going to get a little bit into education a little bit.
Good. Great.
This partially comes from someone who teaches English and writing to a 6th grade through 12th grade setting, and you're on the collegiate end, right?
That's right. Yep.
So persuade this tenured English teacher as to why some writing programs do not work for some people. You might be surprised that I may or may not agree with you.
Right. There you go. So I love the question, and you've given me a really, really easy kind of point of attack, and that you even say for some people. And so that's an easier argument to make, right? If we sort of consider like an English class with 30 students in it, maybe in more of a traditional setting instead of what you're offering, the idea that the class could move at the exact perfect pace for 30 students in tandem is just ridiculous. And
it is, people.
yeah,
It is. I will admit that as a teacher, I cannot expect all my kids to be on the same step.
no,
because they're not the same writer.
right, absolutely. And this is really entrenched in society, our idea. I think it kind of came from like the Prussian model of education that sort of spread around the world. And it really has been remarkably unchanged for, you know, a couple hundred years at this point. And on the one hand, you could say, well, that's a real indicator of what a strong model it is and that this is the right way to do it. I kind of feel like there has to be improvements that we can make that weren't available 2 centuries ago that are now. And what you're doing is a great example of that, that you're teaching virtually, that in the past, if somebody wasn't in West Virginia, they wouldn't be able to learn from you. And now globally, people can learn from you in your virtual teaching sessions. And even we could consider listening to the voices in our heads as an educational product, right? And that people can engage with asynchronously globally. So somebody 5 years from now in Japan will be learning from you watching kind of this video on YouTube. And so that's kind of my first kind of criticism with traditional sort of English classes with 30 students and a teacher, that it's just, there's technological ways that we can improve it. There's different styles of learners, and we're kind of lumping them all in together when we have a cohort. And for my PhD thesis, I did intelligent tutoring systems, which is like artificial intelligence. Yeah.
I know about them. Yes.
Yeah.
They're interesting.
Yeah. And so that just made me really excited about kind of new opportunities for learning, new opportunities for education. And I always worry that I'm offending teachers, which we're on the same page, right? Teachers devote their lives to education. And so I'm a believer in learning. I'm a believer in education just like them. And it's just that I'm interested in kind of new styles. And I think with writing, there's a lot of new styles that are being offered, and some of them are questionable. Sort of sometimes you'll see kind of like the get rich quick with writing for $99. And I hope that people are skeptical of things like that, and that are really kind of careful about where they invest their time, certainly like we talked about, but then also their money. And I hope that if the traditional classroom experience didn't work for them, improving their language skills, improving their English, improving their writing, I hope that later in life they'll try some of these other avenues to learn from and find something that works better for them.
And I'll admit, as an English teacher, I know my model works for a limited subsect of kids. A lot of my students have things such as IEPs and 504s. That's like half or more of my students have those. So I'm always modifying on the fly, even stuff for them. And I don't think people talk about even that happening to modify teaching to someone's wherever they are in their own skill house.
Right.
But I like how you mentioned, it's like that model is a good start, but we never did anything with it for a long time until we were kind of forced to within the last 20 years.
Right. Yeah.
So I agree. We are definitely playing catch up 120%. And I like some of the stuff that's coming out of it. I don't like some of the stuff that's coming out of it too.
And that's absolutely fair. And that's, I think, important with innovation, is to evaluate the innovations and say what's working and what isn't working. One of the dangers is, I think educators like you and I did really well in the classroom model, right? I'm guessing, but yeah, there's a thumbs up, and I did as well. And my brother didn't engage as well with the traditional
Same here.
classroom, and then he became a teacher. And I feel he's such a stronger teacher because it wasn't a natural fit for him. And so he really connects with these students that it doesn't work as well for them. And so that's a challenge as well. Sometimes a lot of educators are like, well, this is great. Everybody should just keep doing it this way. It worked wonderfully for me. And it's not working wonderfully for everybody. So that's where kind of reevaluating the traditional education, I think, is important.
I think I personally had the benefit of that. My college professors, the first day of my college training 10 years ago to be a teacher, literally said, take every experience you had as a student and throw it out the window, because that was at least a year ago and it's now outdated.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I had, mind you, my master's is in education.
Okay.
So I wonder if I had taken a bachelor program, it would have been a little more traditional and not in a good way.
Right.
I love you, Frostburg State University. Your master's program is better than your bachelor's program. Just saying. Anyway, and literally the first day that was hammered in our heads. Take even in your college experience.
Yes.
They said, we know you all just graduated within the last year to within the last 20 years with your bachelor's, because we had some career changers in our master's program. And they said, we have to tell you up front, that is outdated as of last year.
Right.
Don't even bring it into your mindset, because you will be wrong.
Well,
and that
really,
has been with me ever since.
Well, 100%. And it's really tough, because I think the same way that you naturally parent the way you were parented,
Bingo.
you teach the way you were taught. And so that's one thing to say on day one, but it's a lot harder to live that, to set all that aside, because your natural reaction when you're in the classroom and there's something comes up is to just, well, this is what feels natural because this is what I've been doing for 20 years, as you say. So yeah, it's a challenge.
And I honestly wonder if I wonder in a conversation with an older teacher who has, they've been teaching for 40 years versus me 10. I would like to sit down with them and ask them, where do they think that mindset started in their career? I don't want to be offensive with it. I'm just genuinely curious and reflectively, because educators, the number one thing we're told to do is tune into our reflection pool.
Sure.
When in doubt, reflect, basically. Yeah. And I'm curious to know, how is that possible to develop into stagnation?
Right.
I'm not trying to cause offense. I just want to be able to relate to the topic from the other side of the coin.
At one college, when I started working there as a professor, they had kind of an orientation, which was every week all the new faculty got together and we kind of would learn something or other. And a lot of it was pedagogy. And jokingly, I said to the other new faculty, we should be teaching this and the existing faculty should be coming in. And they laughed and agreed, but of course that wasn't the way it was done, right? You can get pre-tenure professors and you can make them do all sorts of things. But somebody with 20 years of classroom experience, they're just gonna laugh at you if you suggest something like that. So yeah, it's a tough part, kind of the entrenched views. And kind of along the same lines, even within kind of the different, all of the different avenues where you can get writing education and education generally. Adam Grant is a psychologist, and he tweeted this idea recently that really stuck with me. And he said, everyone needs a coach when they're learning. And a coach is someone who sees what you're capable of and how you're developing, and they help you develop in the way that's right for you. He said what most people get is cheerleaders that whatever you do, they say, yeah, that's great, keep doing it. Or critics that no matter what you do, they say, no, that's not right. You could do that better. This would be a better way to do it. No, that's no good. And so that's a challenge, I think, in a lot of educational environments. And I don't think any of these people are malicious, but I think there's a lot of cheerleaders and I think there's a lot of critics. And I think that that's true in writing programs as well as every other educational environment. And that's just a challenge. And when I think of my English teachers, I think when I was going through kind of K to 12, I think most of them were probably cheerleaders or critics, and they weren't bad people, but that's kind of the feedback would often be their reaction as a reader to my writing, rather than trying to understand how I was developing as a writer and focusing on that.
And that's probably where I am a little bit different in how I run my classroom, because I trained as a writing tutor and a writing coach in college before I became a teacher. And all of that training is the basis for how I run my writing workshops. I run project-based learning and writing workshop style learning in my classes because the kids benefit from it more. It's way more work on me.
Yes.
But I'm a coach. I'm a facilitator. I'm not a teacher, and that's okay with me.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because that's it. I think being a coach, the downside to that is it's way more work. It's way more demanding than being a cheerleader or a critic. And so that's the big downside.
And this is just kind of retrospective, maybe from us thinking as students, not as educators. Do you think some of your favorite teachers you had as a student then were the people who were also coaches and other things outside of life, like outside of teaching life? Like some of my favorite math teachers, I was a horrible math student. Some of my favorite math teachers were like the basketball coach.
Interesting.
And I think it's because they have that skill of, I need to talk to you one-on-one.
Well, it's funny because I don't know that there was many experiences in K to 12 that I remember that with, but from research, and I kind of got into education research a little bit when I was working on intelligent tutoring systems, and really one-on-one tutoring, one-on-one instruction, one-on-one coaching, kind of one-on-one sort of like apprenticeships, whatever you want to call it. It's the gold standard of learning. And it's about, I think a research group at the University of Memphis, they quantified it, and it was 4 times as effective as classroom instruction.
Yes.
And so like, it's just wild to think that like 2 hours of that style of education could take the place of 8 hours of classroom instruction. And that's just always blown me away. And just the reality is there's resource constraints. We can't assign every student a one-on-one tutor for 8 hours a day. But I think that people really underestimate how powerful of a learning approach that is. Yeah.
And it's not just about individualizing the instruction. It's about that someone believes in me.
Sure.
Component.
Sure.
That I will admit, as a teacher, I know I have students who think I didn't care about them, and that hurts.
Yeah.
Because the opposite is true. Honestly, it's no, I'm freaking out because I couldn't help you, kid.
Yeah.
So definitely worth considering if from multiple sides of the facet of that conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Look at where you are and see where you fall.
Sure.
As far as in comparison to others. So moving on back to the world of authordom from education a little bit, what are examples of marketing things you've done as a self-publisher, if you have self-published anything, that have worked?
So I have self-published. The novella I mentioned, Merchant Magician, was self-published. And before that, I self-published an earlier novella that I tried to release as a serial. And so I released basically each chapter kind of over time on sites like Wattpad. And then my real estate book was self-published as well. All of the things that I've tried for marketing, and in all honesty, I'd say none of them work particularly well. And so I've mostly been finding out things that didn't work.
It's part of the process for me too. So
yeah, the thing that probably did work for me writing, and it's from back when I was doing the personal finance blog, and it was first of all, the personal finance blog, not really intentionally, but it turned out to be something that people really like, information that people would look for, and information people needed to solve a problem. And fiction is rarely going to be that, right?
Right.
It's not like figuring out how do I set up a tax account or how do I save for my child's education down the road. It's not solving a problem. And So the blog, just by showing up every day and continuing to write and to write things that were useful for people and things that people wanted to seek out, that eventually grew into something that then there were, you know, thousands of people coming every day, and it made money with Google advertising and all of that sort of thing. And I was blogging with another blogger, and I sold my half of the blog to him. So it developed into something that was, valuable enough for that. And so applying that to fiction is trickier. The thing that I'm gearing up to try for marketing is there's an idea of like a book that we have as our vision of a book is very much influenced by the publishing industry over the last 100 or so years. And so we think of it as this object of a certain size and of a certain number of pages, and that's what a book needs to be like. And some people have put forward the idea that there used to be like a pamphlet market around the war for American independence, where people could earn a living selling pamphlets. And so that a book can be all sorts of different things that you can imagine instead of just this way the publishing industries produce them. And so I'm thinking about trying to do a bunch of very short focused books that are probably, this would be more for nonfiction than for fiction, but where it might be more like 8,000 words as opposed to, you know, kind of a 72,000 word, and just release really tight focused books, probably quite inexpensively, and then on a specific topic. And that's something that I'm thinking about trying.
And that pulls from your past of working with blog entries, I imagine, too.
Absolutely. So 7,000 or 8,000 words, that's like a series of blog posts on a topic, and that's really tractable for me to write. When I was writing the real estate investing book, it was a little bit daunting because it was just a lot bigger than anything I'd ever written before. So this would be kind of releasing kind of books that looked a lot like blog posts. Yeah.
And that would be a lot more approachable, I think, to the everyday consumer. I'm thinking of some of my students who not necessarily aren't struggling with reading, but they just, I want my information and I want to get out kind of deal.
Again, I suspect you and I were really strong readers. We're really enthusiastic readers. And
developmental reading is part of my career, huh? And that's why I said that.
Right, yeah, sure. But, and that's it. Like, I think kind of sometimes we can assume that readers are a lot more enthusiastic about reading extensive, large works than they are. And I don't really get audiobooks. I'll listen to an audiobook when I'm in the car on a trip, and our car, the shocks weren't very good and it was just too loud. And so I stopped even listening to audiobooks in the car because I couldn't hear it. And I just don't have any interest in audiobooks when I can read the book. I was a little bit put out that an author I like released a book first as an audiobook and then 6 months later as a written book.
That's
and I was
been a pattern lately. Yes. Why are you putting the cart before the horse?
Yes. But I was talking to a publisher, and this was the small press publisher that I submitted to, and he said that 75% of his sales are audiobooks. People love audiobooks. And so even though it's not my preferred packaging for a book, that's what the market wants. And so I try to be responsive to that. Think about what is it that readers want rather than what would I prefer.
And that's a good point, because I'm thinking of something that one of my favorite authors, paranormal romance author, has said,
Okay.
J.R. Ward.
Okay.
It's actually a smart quote, believe it or not. Coming from paranormal romance, she said, I compete at a global stage, not just for people's time, but for their purchasing power. And I say it that way because some of the people who frequent this channel have kid-aged audiences, and the purchasing power is in mom and dad's hands, not in theirs.
Gotcha.
But she goes on to say, I have to keep in mind I'm competing for their time and their purchasing power over stuff like YouTube,
right,
Twitch,
right,
Netflix, PlayStation, Xbox. She said, I got to keep in mind that I'm in entertainment.
Yes. I
First
agree.
of all.
Yes, I agree 100%. And I think she's very wise to take such a broad perspective.
And
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking in context of your shorter books. For someone who prefers the audio visual content, this would be way more approachable to them,
Absolutely.
especially if it's get it out information. Are you
Yeah.
looking, you said they're nonfiction, right?
So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards. And so I might write, for example, I like retired early. And so it might be like an 8 or 9,000 word book about retiring early. That's just very, here's the information that you need to know for somebody who might be intimidated by 500 word or 500 pages, a 500-page book on retiring early. And so things like that, it would probably be something really practical and pragmatic that's kind of answering a specific question for someone.
And obviously current relevancy to topics and trends, because that is actually, I think, a trend, not necessarily for people in my age group, but for the next generation down, because I'm in my mid-30s.
Sure.
I think a lot of early 20-somethings saw a good chunk of my generation learn how to do that.
Yes.
And they're like, I want to perfect it now. So you might have a lot of people pick up topics like that and not realize it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And jumping back to earlier, you sort of said romance a little bit kind of apologetically or dismissively. And I'm not a romance reader, but romance authors are like the best
The
authors out
number one
there.
selling genre.
Huge. But then also as a group, romance authors are really sweet. They're really helpful. They're really, really good people. Yeah. Yeah. And so, I don't know. I found that a lot of the information out there helping authors is often coming from romance authors, and they're kind of willing to give everybody else a leg up and help them. And so, I haven't read their romance, I haven't read their fiction, but their nonfiction's been really useful. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I will agree with that. Also, I've seen where a lot of psychological thriller horror authors have had some really good feedback. That as someone who does fantasy romance, it's like, I need to try that angle.
Right.
And it worked. So speaking of things that did and didn't work, what are some things you've tried with marketing in the past that you would like to attempt again under different circumstances, or by changing a few elements from the last time, especially since you have these newer books coming out, or might be considering more fiction in the future?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to try more giving writing away. So being a little bit less focused on selling it. And there's a quote somewhere that I read that if you can't get people to read what you're writing for free, good luck selling it. And there's a lot of kind of serial fiction venues that a number of people have kind of built a career releasing fiction on, and then eventually building up to a readership that was willing to pay for their work. And so I tried that with the first kind of novella that I developed, and you might find it interesting. It was the conceit of it was that it was a fantasy novel that was taking place as a group of educators were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And so every chapter would go from the fantasy world where they were fighting kobolds and casting spells to them sitting around talking about their lives and talking about the game in the real world.
It's amazing. I love it.
I thought it was a really fun idea, but I think I just didn't have the writing ability when I did it, and I kind of released it kind of each chapter as it went on kind of Wattpad and an archive of our own and Royal Road and Reddit serials and everywhere I could where I could do something along those lines. So I'm thinking that if the nautical high fantasy work that I've sort of submitted to the small press, if the small press isn't interested, my plan is to release that similarly serially for free, and really just sort of give it to people as a free taste of my writing, and then hopefully they'll be interested in things that I sell down the road, or things like my Merchant Magician that are available for sale now.
And I'm only asking this because I had another author say something very similar, and then they went on to say they did this.
Yeah.
Would you consider moving it to something like Kindle Vella?
So I 100% would. I tried Kindle Vella when it was first being released. I kind of signed on and I got like no readers whatsoever.
No.
And it's funny because I think the trick with Kindle Vella is that you have to bring your own readers to the platform. And and some of these serial platforms are better at discovery, they call it, which is like new readers finding your work, and others are worse at it, that it's a place to put your work and to direct readers to.
Ah.
And Kindle Vella, you need to bring the readers. What's interesting about Kindle Vella is I was looking at the math of it with the royalties and all of that, and I just sort of said, there's nothing here, and I gave up on it. But Kindle Vella's been paying bonuses to people.
Yes.
And the bonus is like 20 times your
Yes.
royalty. And so
Yes.
all the money in Kindle Vella is with the bonuses, and there's good money to be made if you can bring readers there, because the royalties are a small part of your payment. The bonuses are there. What worries me about Kindle Vella is that Jeff Bezos might eventually say, I can't pay the bonuses anymore, I'm cutting it off.
Like
And
you did with KDP.
yes, and you've just spent all this time building up his platform, bringing all of these readers, maybe paying to advertise it, and then all of a sudden it drops to 5% of what they were paying you before, and you're kind of stuck in this kind of, I guess, a walled garden, they often call it, these places that somebody else controls. And
Like
so
the gatekeeper
yeah,
there. Yep.
yes.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
that's kind of been my issue with Kindle Vella, that I'm not really willing to invest to bring readers to it, and it doesn't seem to provide enough readers to be worth doing.
I think that's a smart, especially connecting it back to what we were saying earlier, know your process. If you
Yeah,
already have the readers and you think it's worth it, try it. But
yeah,
from our point of view, we have such a, I don't want to say tiny because they're quite loud in their support. We have
sure.
a tiny community by comparison to some of the more popular people who, cracked off doing great on Vela.
Yes,
So by comparison, our processes have to pivot and be different. Very
yes.
good,
Yeah.
enlightening information for people to have, I think, in that regard. Do you do a mailing list as part of your advertising at this time?
So I do, and a mailing list. There's a book, Newsletter Ninja, I believe, which is great. It everybody sort of says this is if you're at all thinking about doing a mailing list, this is what you got to do. And the woman who wrote it, a romance author, does a really good job of breaking it down and valuable information. I built my mailing list with Story Origins, which is similar to another site called Book Funnel. I kind of say they're the Coke and Pepsi. And
they really are.
Yeah, they work really well. And if you put the time in and you kind of work at it, you'll build up a newsletter. And there's people who are like, I've built up to kind of, 4,000 people getting my newsletter and everything. It goes back to what you were talking about earlier about it's an investment of your time, if nothing else. And I just got to the point where I was releasing the mailing list, I was building the newsletter, I was getting readers, and I just really questioned whether it was selling any books for me or not. And there are people who swear by it. So there's people
Some
who
people
get
are very, very
yes.
lucky with their engagement.
Yes.
And their audience they've attracted.
Absolutely. And so there's people who probably get angry at me for just sort of saying that. But for me personally, it just seemed like that time was better put into writing and moving along my work in progress more than building the mailing list. That's something you were asking what I might come back to. Absolutely, I'd come back to that down the road if I had a few more works that are available for purchase, a little bit more of a backlog, and if there might be more of a payoff from kind of people receiving the newsletter. But it almost becomes its own part-time job to really build a mailing list and a newsletter.
That's a very good insight, I think. And like we said earlier, know your time, know where you can invest it.
Yes.
So we're kind of getting ready to wear things down and wrap things up to the end of our conversation. So list the top 5 things every author needs and every other creative mind needs to include, maybe not in their newsletter, but maybe then widening it out into just marketing in general.
Oh, that's interesting. So, 5 things that you need in marketing in general. So I think kind of like what we've been talking about, the one thing is that you have to evaluate your marketing. It's not just hearing the best practices. This is what somebody I respect says you do marketing, so I'm just going to blindly follow it. You really have to evaluate how well it's working for you. I think you have to put your like integrity and morality into your marketing, and anything that feels distasteful to be doing, you shouldn't do. And so I think that anytime somebody's thinking, this is a moral compromise I feel like I need to make to develop as a writer, please be careful and please decide whether or not that's a long-term choice that you're going to be comfortable with and that you really want to do.
To paraphrase Hunger Games, do not sacrifice your brand as tribute, please.
Sure, absolutely. And I think there are kind of, I think there are people that get some sort of short-term gains, and I'm just not sure what I'm not sure what the long-term impact really is with some of these things. More kind of, I guess, like connect your marketing and put into your marketing insights that you've received from other people's marketing. And so what I mean by that is almost anytime I see a writer marketing a Facebook ad or whatever, I'll really go and I'll look at their book and I'll see what they're doing and I'll try to figure out kind of what they've done and what's working for them. So anytime I see a debut author who kind of moves a ton of books, I'm really interested because they don't have a readership that's loyal to them. They've done something to get people to take a chance on their book. And so I really try to figure out kind of what people are doing, and then anything I can kind of pick from that and then put into my own marketing, I absolutely will. I guess you want in your marketing to accurately convey what it is that you're selling. So the product, so you want your marketing to accurately tell people this is what they're going to get. And then the fifth one, which may again be a little bit counterproductive, but it's good if your marketing turns off people who are the wrong readers for what you're producing.
Yes. And that goes into like knowing your keywords even. So very
absolutely
good. Keep going.
And so every time I see kind of a poor rating, and when I see writers kind of railing, how dare this person give me a 1-star review, how dare they give me a 3-star review, and they're angry about it, I always think the better view of it is that this is warning off people who aren't going to enjoy your book. And what do you accomplish getting somebody to read your book and then they don't enjoy it? So even Amazon's algorithm, the 5-star reviews and the 1-star review are both important and useful for them to find the person who's going to enjoy your book. And that's who you really want to get to. And so just selling copies, just moving it, if you're selling it to somebody who isn't going to enjoy it, I don't even want to do that. And so I would almost, if somebody came and said, your book made me really angry, I disliked it so much, I'd be tempted to give them a full refund and say, I'm sorry that it wasn't the book for you. And so to me, to avoid that, somebody who's just really going to dislike the book is valuable, is absolutely valuable. Yeah.
And even if it's somebody who, say, for example, they love YA, urban, contemporary, such and such, whatever type books you might be writing. And even if they have feedback that is, I didn't like your book because of, and they give you like, this happened, take those as learning instances.
Sure.
I've actually distanced myself from a couple of authors in the last couple of months because every single time and most of the reviews they were getting were saying, this needs an edit. There's so many, it's so grammatically, I can't even read it. I love the story. Right. I can't get through it because of the grammar. Well, they're just haters. Right. No, they're your paying audience.
Yes.
That goes to what you were saying earlier. separate the writer from the writing.
Yes.
You are a human
yes.
being. That writing
Yes.
is a piece of paper with words on it.
Yes. Yes. No, I 100% agree with you. And you can get kind of just things that it's not what you wanted. So I quite enjoy urban fantasy, and paranormal romance is right next to urban fantasy.
There's
And
a
so,
huge overlap.
yeah. And so I could see, and I wouldn't like fault it, but I think an author who is writing paranormal romance might be like, well, maybe I should try to portray it as urban fantasy and get those people to read my book. And that's not where you want to go with it. You know, it's not going to be a good outcome. And so I think if I was reading a paranormal romance that kind of I'd been tricked into reading, I'd kind of be like, well, now what's going on here?
That is
And,
a note
you know,
to you as the author,
yeah.
that especially for an indie author, because you're the one who normally controls putting these in, your
Yes.
keywords were wrong. Your
Yes.
category was not quite right. Go back and
Yes.
edit them, learn from the lesson, leave a comment if you're able of, thank you for this heads up. I will make changes to the keywords and the categories.
Yes.
Bam. Be
Yes.
transparent. Stop calling them haters. You're
Yes.
ruining your own audience.
100%. Yep. 100%.
So I'm sorry if you disagree with me, fellow indie authors. It's a maturity check. It's a tiny maturity check.
Yes.
At least from me, that's what it feels like. Good
Yeah.
day.
No, I think you're dead on. And the sad thing about that is it's such an actionable feedback. It's a problem that's so easy to fix as part of the process. And so to just throw it away and say, I'm not going to listen to that, it's it's really harmful to the author themselves. It's sad.
It means you're not willing to learn from your mistakes.
Yes.
It means you're not willing to be human, and therefore you're not relatable. I'm sorry,
Right.
I hate to go there,
Right.
but some people, some audience members are that way.
Sure.
They really are.
Yep.
Keep that in mind. You're dealing with another human being, basically.
Yes.
So, what are some things authors can do to assess their financial investments in self-publishing versus when is it time to pivot into a new marketing technique or hang up the hat?
Yeah, it's funny because it's something that I think the writers community likes to gloss over. So sometimes there'll be a service that's available for sale and people will say, this is your business. If you're not willing to invest in your business, then you shouldn't be a writer. And it's really like part of a business is exactly what we've been talking about earlier in this. Economists call it opportunity cost, that anything that you choose to do is something else that you
I was
can't
hoping
do.
you would go there. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And so the thing is all marketing, no matter how much it is, no matter how much or little it is, you're investing your time and you're investing your money in that. And it's to the exception of something else. It's the loss of something else. And so I really feel that with writers and writers community, we have to take a little bit more of a higher level view where we say, these are costs and you have to evaluate them for yourself. And it might be a no-brainer for me to put money into this, but you have to decide whether or not it makes sense for you. And so sometimes these things, it seems like a really small cost, but if somebody's not making any money off of their books, and if money's really tight, even what might be really small to us might be quite large to them. And so that's just kind of generally, I kind of feel like that's just something that you have to think about. And so if they're getting a message from other writers that you have to spend money to make money and just put money into whatever people tell you to, I don't buy that, and really weigh things for yourself. With a lot of writing courses, I think sometimes the value of the course and the benefit can almost be inversely proportional to the cost. And so students in your course, it's probably oftentimes the students aren't paying for it. Maybe their parents are paying for it. Maybe it's coming from the state.
With my international students, mom and dad pay tuition. So I'm feeling you completely here, because my international students try 10 times harder than my students who are here on tax dollars.
Yeah. But even that, the students on tax dollars, they're getting an incredible instruction from you that they're paying nothing for. Whereas there's courses that'll cost $4,000. And if you look at people who've taken the course, they're screaming bloody murder because they feel cheated. And so that's something that I just say, I'm not saying never pay for anything that you're learning. I'm not saying don't ever pay for marketing, but when people say treat it as a business, it doesn't mean just throw out money without thinking about it. It means evaluating the benefit you're going to get from the money that you spend. And so that's just something that I sometimes feel like some people are spending money they don't really have. And they've been kind of lulled into this idea that that's the process, that's what they should be doing. And I don't think that's the process. I don't think that's what they should be doing.
So kind of recapping to what we said as educators applies too. Go into your inner reflection pool on stuff like this. My husband's grandfather always said, with big purchases, if you're not sure, you need to sleep on it.
Great. Yeah, great advice. Yeah.
It sounds silly.
Yeah.
It sounds, older generation cliche. If your gut is in cramps or you're going, I'm procrastinating this, maybe you should really just shelve it and sleep on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's I was recently on Reddit, and it was a personal finance forum. It was nothing to do with writing, but this man said that his parents had for the last 10 years full time devoted themselves to trying to become children's book authors, and they'd been writing books and paying to have lavish kind of covers made and illustrations, and they'd been going to farmers markets and they'd been trying to sort of sell them. And he said that in the last decade they'd burned through all of their savings and they'd made $5,000 total from all of these children's books that they'd sold over a decade. And he said that they just believe in themselves. Eventually they're going to be really big names in children's books, and it's going to make them rich, and they just need to kind of keep at it. And I kind of admire the devotion and I admire the commitment, but I'm just a little bit horrified at what these people are doing to their lives, and I worry on their behalf that what's going to happen if it never does take off. Right. And so that's kind of, people would probably call me bourgeoisie for being so concerned about it, but paying the bills, paying your rent, it's important things as well, not kind of driving yourself to destitution for your art. And so that's something that I always hope writers will take into account and will consider.
Right. And I'm just going to pull back and say, to any career you do, that applies.
Yes.
I literally, I'm thinking about some of my students who 10 years ago as seniors went and got like their deep sea welding license.
Right.
Can they really do that as a sustainable? Now, mind you, some of them are making good money because they have
huge
government military contracts.
Yes.
But is that really truly going to be constantly a trajectory that goes up in their career?
Yes.
Possibly not. There's going to be some down spikes.
Yeah.
And that's true in any career, guys.
Well, I was teaching computer science, and to a lot of people that would be like, well, that's great. He's handing out tickets for high salaries to everybody.
No, you're not. Not this day. 10 years ago? Yes.
Sure. What I found is that there's all sorts of people who are studying computer science and they hate it. It's just like pulling teeth for them to kind of engage with the material and to do the assignments and to prepare for the exams. And I just beg them. I'd say, I'm not inventing this stuff. This is the same material you're going to be doing on the job. And if you don't enjoy it now, you're not going to enjoy it then. And 40 years is a long time to spend on something that you despise.
Yes.
And it was for some reason they didn't believe me. And so 100% for any career, no matter how lucrative it seems, you have to evaluate and see, how am I doing at this? And sometimes you have to pivot if success is proving elusive. Yeah.
Very much so. Very much so. I like the note we're ending on with that, because we're at the end of our time together. It's been a wonderful hour or so, my dear friend. So before we get things wrapped up, I definitely want to ask you, is there anyone in your community you want to give a shout out to? Because we're all about celebrating our friends and our supports around here.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm really I'm really working on my own. And so I don't even have a lot of, I know a lot of people have kind of, this is somebody in my writers group and, you know, check out their book. And I would encourage people to check out Jenna O'Malley's Bound by Fate and Blood. I've heard it's incredible. And it was published on Valentine's Day a year ago, so you know it's going to be a very romantic book, and check
twins.
it out. Yeah, yeah. And so if anybody's looking for something new, that's a book to consider.
Thank you so very much for that, my friend. Are you, this is okay if I'm not allowed to ask this because of non-disclosure things. May I ask who was your partner with your blog that you had?
So yeah, his name was Mike Holman, and he it's really funny because I was talking to him about genre fiction, and he's like, "Oh, I'm not interested in genre fiction." And I said, okay. And we were talking. He goes, oh, I like The Hobbit. Oh, I like Lord of the Rings. Oh, I like this. I like this. I like this. And then he's like, I guess I like genre fiction.
Yeah, you like genre fiction and you don't even know that the
Yeah,
movies and whatnot you've been watching
yeah,
have been conditioning you for them, guys.
yeah. And so it's funny. He's published one book. He wasn't terribly interested in it, and it was on RESPs, which is like a Canadian tax advantage savings account for your children. It's the only book on the subject on the market, and he still, over 10 years later, sells regular copies of it. He's
Wow.
completely disinterested in it, and I tell him that he's living writer's dreams. We all desperately want what he has, where he
Yes.
keeps selling books month after month after month, and it's really funny. So yeah, so he
He
was my
found
blogging
that
partner.
niche topic that everyone needed and still does.
That's exactly
Lucky.
it. Yes, yes,
Lucky.
yeah,
Wonderful. Thank you for
yeah.
shouting that out and sharing that. So let's get back to focusing on you as we wind things down for the day. What are some upcoming events, launches, and where do we find you? Recap anything you'd like in the last bit of the conversation. Really take the time, shout people out. And I'm going to give you solo mode for this, my friend.
Great. So you can read everything going on with me at johnchampaign.com. On my website, I have a blog, and I kind of write about self-publishing and story ideas and some business ideas and on a bunch of different topics like what we've talked about today. As I talked about earlier, I have our first role-playing game that's going to be coming out. It's going to be free, and it's going to be for 2 to 5 people to learn how to tabletop role play with no prior experience and no preparation in 2 to 3 hours as a group. I have Merchant Magician, which is my urban fantasy novella that came out about a year ago. It's one reader described it as an economic wizard. And so it's a fantasy novel with a lot of economic concepts, kind of like we've been talking about a little bit here today. And I just recently published Getting Started as a Small Scale Landlord. If somebody has any interest in real estate investing, and if they'd like to read about how to become a landlord, treating it as a job rather than a get rich quick scheme, I think they'd really enjoy it. It's a nice tight read, and people have said that they found it a lot more readable than they expected and enjoyable. And oftentimes they'll read through it in a single session and found it quite easy and straightforward.
Wonderful. And I hope everyone will check out all of the links I've shared in the description box below for you. Of course, my lovelies, go ahead, check him out, give him all of the support. And we're actually going to go ahead and definitely wind down for the day, my dears. So, as always, thank you for sitting down and listening to the voices in our heads today. And my lovelies, take care of yourselves a little bit better each and every day. We know you're worth it. Bye.